When resistance softens, a Buddha reflection. You don't always notice it, but something in you is often bracing against the moment. A quiet tension in the body, a subtle resistance in the mind, as if life should be moving differently than it is. What if that pressure isn't coming from life itself, but from the way it's being held? In this reflection, you'll begin to see how stress forms, how resistance quietly shapes your experience, and how a simple shift in awareness can soften it. Not by changing the world around you, but by understanding the way you meet it. The quiet weight you carry. You may not always notice it at first. The way your shoulders hold a subtle tightness. The way your breath shortens when nothing urgent is happening. The way your thoughts begin to move faster than the moment requires. It feels ordinary, almost natural, as if this low hum of tension is simply part of being alive. And yet, if you pause long enough, something in you begins to question it. There is a quiet curiosity that asks whether this constant pressure is truly necessary. The Buddha often invited a different kind of looking. Not a search for solutions, but a gentle observation of what is already present. When you begin to look in this way, you may notice that the tension does not come from the moment itself. It comes from how the mind leans against it, how it resists what is already here. And in that small recognition, something begins to soften. When the mind pushes back, a situation appears, simple or complex, expected or sudden. Almost instantly, the mind begins its movement. It questions, calculates, anticipates. It asks what should be different, what could go wrong, what must be controlled. Beneath all of this movement, there is a quiet refusal. A subtle sense that this moment should not be exactly as it is. The Buddha saw this clearly in human experience, not as a flaw, but as a pattern. When the mind pushes against reality, the body listens. The breath tightens, the heart quickens, the muscles prepare. The moment has not changed, but your relationship to it has. And that relationship is where the strain begins. The body listens. When the mind resists, the body carries the burden. You may think stress lives in your circumstances, but often it settles quietly in the body long before you notice it fully. A tightening in the chest, a restless shifting, a subtle fatigue that does not seem to leave. These are not random signals. They are responses to the mind's silent argument with what is happening. The Buddha did not separate mind and body. He saw them as reflections of one movement. When resistance fades, even slightly, the body begins to respond. The breath deepens without effort. The muscles release without instruction. It is not that the world has changed. It is that the struggle has paused, and in that pause, the body remembers how to rest. The illusion of urgency. There is a feeling that often accompanies stress. A sense that something must be resolved immediately. That if you do not act now, something essential will be lost. This urgency can feel convincing, even necessary. Yet when you look closely, many of these moments do not require immediate action at all. The Buddha pointed toward a quieter understanding. Not every thought deserves to become a reaction. Not every discomfort requires instant correction. When you allow a moment to remain as it is, without rushing to fix it, you begin to see that much of the urgency was created by the mind itself. And without that urgency, the pressure begins to dissolve. Letting the moment be. There is a simple phrase that carries quiet power. This is what is. Not as resignation, but as recognition. When the mind stops arguing with the moment, even briefly, something shifts. The tension that was held in resistance begins to loosen. The Buddha's way was not about changing reality first. It was about seeing it clearly. And in that clarity, the need to struggle softens. You begin to experience that calm does not come from perfect conditions. It begins the moment the fight with the present ends. Insight, Perception, and Awareness Quiz. After you have listened, open the quiz tab. The questions reveal how you interpreted what you heard and invite you to notice the hidden logic in your reactions. Then, share your score in the comments. A different kind of strength. Peace is not found by forcing the world, but by understanding it. You may have learned to associate strength with control. The ability to manage outcomes, to shape situations, to ensure things go as planned. But there is another kind of strength that reveals itself more quietly. It does not come from tightening your grip, but from loosening it. The Buddha embodied this strength through balance. A steady presence that did not collapse in difficulty, yet did not resist it either. When you begin to allow life to unfold without constant interference, you discover a resilience that does not depend on control. It grows from alignment, from moving with the moment rather than against it. When identity is challenged, even as resistance to situations begins to soften, another layer may quietly remain. It appears when something touches the image you carry of yourself. When you are misunderstood, when you make a mistake. When life does not reflect the person you believe yourself to be. In these moments, the tension feels different, more personal, more sensitive. The Buddha saw that this too is a form of attachment. Not to things, but to identity. And when that identity is challenged, the mind resists again. Not because reality is unbearable, but because it does not match the story you have been holding. The guarded self. The mind often acts like a protector of this identity. It defends, explains, justifies. It reshapes situations so they fit the image it wants to maintain. At first, this may feel like protection. But over time, it creates distance from what is actually happening. The Buddha's insight was gentle but clear. What you call the self is not fixed. It is a collection of changing experiences, thoughts, and roles. When you see this directly, the need to defend it begins to fade. And with that fading, a deep tension you may not have noticed begins to release. The ease of humility. The one who does not cling to self moves freely through the world. Humility is often misunderstood. It is not about lowering yourself. It is about no longer needing to protect a rigid image. When you allow yourself to be incomplete, to be learning, to be changing, something opens. The Buddha pointed toward this openness as freedom. When you no longer resist experiences that challenge your identity, they become teachers instead of threats. And in that shift, the struggle softens. Life becomes less about proving who you are, and more about discovering what is true in each moment. The habit of judgment. Even as identity loosens, the mind still carries another habit. It labels everything, good or bad, right or wrong, success or failure. These labels appear so quickly that they seem inseparable from experience itself. But the Buddha invited a different approach, to see without immediately naming. to notice without rushing to conclude. When you begin to observe in this way, you discover that judgment is not necessary for awareness. And without judgment, the mind becomes lighter, less entangled in reaction. Watching without interference. There is a quiet shift that happens when you begin to witness your experience. A thought arises, and instead of following it, you simply notice it. An emotion moves through the body, and instead of resisting it, you allow it to unfold. The Buddha practiced this kind of seeing deeply, not controlling, not suppressing, but observing with clarity. And through this observation, something becomes obvious. Everything changes. Thoughts pass, emotions rise and fall, sensations come and go. When you stop interfering, the natural movement of life reveals itself. The softening of reaction. What is seen clearly no longer needs to be resisted. When judgment fades, reactions begin to soften. You may still feel emotions, still encounter difficulty, but the intensity changes. Without the added layer of resistance, experiences move more freely through you. The Buddha did not remove emotion, he understood it. And in that understanding, emotional life became less turbulent. When you allow anger, fear, or sadness to be seen without condemnation, they lose their grip. They become part of the flow, not something to fight against. The space between moments. As witnessing life deepens, you begin to notice something subtle, a space between experiences. A quiet gap where the mind is not reacting, not labeling, not resisting. In that space, there is a sense of ease that does not depend on anything changing. The Buddha lived from this space, not separate from life, but fully present within it. When you touch this stillness, even briefly, you begin to trust it. You see that peace is not something to create. It is something that appears when the noise of resistance fades. Living without the fight. As awareness deepens in life, the patterns become clearer. The stress that once felt unavoidable begins to reveal its roots. The resistance to moments, the defense of identity, the habit of judgment. As these soften, life itself feels different. The Buddha's way was never about escaping the world. It was about seeing it so clearly that the struggle within it dissolves. When you stop fighting what is already here, you discover a quiet strength. A calm that does not depend on certainty. A balance that remains even as life continues to change. The gentle realization. Freedom is found where nothing is forced. In the flow of life, nothing dramatic needs to happen. Life continues as it always has. Situations arise and pass. Thoughts come and go. Emotions move through their natural cycles. But your relationship to all of it has changed. The Buddha's insight reveals itself not as a concept, but as a lived experience. When the mind no longer resists, when identity no longer needs protection, when judgment gives way to observation, something quiet and steady remains. You begin to move with life rather than against it. And in that movement, there is a freedom that feels simple, natural, and deeply at ease. This is Buddha Reflections, where philosophy, insight, and lived experience meet to explore mind, impermanence, and release. The conversation doesn't end here. Visit the quiz tab and share your score in the comments. Thanks for your time, it's been a delight. What should we explore next? Comment, share, and save your insight. Subscribe to Orbital Dharma and keep your thoughts bright.